Let's get our Bibles out and open them up to Deuteronomy chapter 13 as we continue in our verse-by-verse study through the book of Deuteronomy. There is a title. The title of today's message is The Cost of Compromise, Staying True to God's Commands. So let's stand together for the reading of the Word. We're going to read the first 5 verses, beginning at verse 1. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, "Let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them," you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. But the prophet or the dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of slavery, to make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Lord, as we consider your word, your scriptures, your truth, I pray, Lord, you would give us understanding. That we would understand you, your nature, your character. That we would understand what is important to you and what you, our Creator, expect of us, your creation. And pray your word would reveal these things to us today. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. You know, I heard that in the Bible there's all of these times where people are getting killed, where people are being stoned. Yeah, I've heard that, but we try to stay away from those verses, right? We don't want to think about that. Don't want to talk about that. The consequences that God will prescribe in this chapter might be unnerving. In fact, they are. You know, I read it and I'm like, I'm a little unnerved by this. You might think they are harsh. They might make you uncomfortable. What do you mean? This is all this person did and you're going to stone them? If your faith is not strong, you might find offense at reading this. If you don't understand the importance of understanding the Bible in and through a specific context, you might be dismayed. Context is everything. We have to interpret this in the context in which it was written. We might read this and we might grow discontent or uncomfortable with our decision to serve a God who at times calls for the execution of friends and family members and as we're going to see at the end of this chapter, entire villages over something that we culturally might not see as being a fitting crime. We read multiple times in the Old Testament how our God is slow to anger. We like that. That he's abounding in steadfast love, that he's forgiving iniquity and transgressions. This is just one of those common refrains in the Bible about the nature of our God. And we say, this is how I want to think about my God. He is patient and loving and forgiving and extending grace and compassionate and faithful. And all these things are true, but God has not been shy about his nature towards being just. In Numbers 14, verse 18, we get one of these many accounts where we learn about these attributes that we like. You know, his faithfulness and his forgiveness and his grace and his mercy. But that verse ends with, in Numbers 14, the second half of verse 18, it ends with this. He says, he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children to the third and fourth generations. And we've talked about what that means. People read that, visiting the iniquity upon the children, third and fourth generation. What does that mean? And there's lots of crazy ideas out there. This is not about, there's a superstition myth of this thing called generational curses. I just want to let you know that's not real. That's not biblical. We've talked about that. This simply means that God will not forget that he has given his children a commandment to follow. And even if his children forget the commandment, even after multiple generations, God is like, I haven't forgotten. I haven't forgotten the commandments that I've given you. God will not forget what he expects of them. They will remain guilty. God will render justice upon those who break his commandments. And if the sin is heinous, if it is extremely wicked, if it is, in these accounts here, a matter of divine treason, because that's what we're reading about today. When we think about treason, our governments respond, harshly to treason. That's what we have here today. This is divine treason. And he promises a justice that is complete. And that is what these passages are about. They're about treason. We remember Israel was a theocracy, living under the leadership of God and being ruled by his commandments. They were in a very unique situation. And when we read today's passage, just like last week, just like many of the others in the Old Testament, we need to understand it in that context. They existed as a unique nation serving one God as a theocracy. Their government was established around this. And these are warnings against divine treason, and they are reminders that these potential actions of disobedience are contagious. God did not want his nation that he's led into a promised land with promises for them to prosper and to experience good things. He didn't want them to be in jeopardy of losing it all. And so he took these things seriously. He wanted them to walk in blessing. He wants them to multiply and enjoy the promised land that he's giving them. And they can experience it all in its fullness. All they have to do is serve their God and be careful to follow the guidelines that he's given them. And they have been told to destroy the gods of the nations. They have been told to tear down their temples. And then you might wonder, as they stood here listening to Moses' sermon, before they went into the promised land, they're getting all of this retelling of the law. Remember, that's what Deuteronomy means. And as he's giving them this information, they stand there listening to Moses. They're in church. They might ask, how could that ever happen? Here we are under the word, excited about what God's about to do in our midst. We're all excited to see the hand of the Lord move. We've seen the hand of the Lord move already, giving us victory in other places. How could we walk away and serve other gods? They were feeling spiritually strong. They were on the verge of that great promise that their ancestors looked forward to. They saw God destroy the wicked nations at their own hand. And they firmly believed that God would do it again. And they might be thinking from this place of spiritual comfort, from this place of mutual social affirmation, that there's no way they are going to forsake their God and worship the idols of these wicked people. Moses, that's crazy. Why would you think we would ever do that? So Moses says, well, if you're wondering how this might happen, let me lay out a few scenarios for you. And in today's chapter, we get 3 of those. You don't know how a faithful people might fall into sin? Well, let me tell you, this is how it will play out. So, point 1, discernment over deception. This is from the first 5 verses. We read them. We'll reread a couple of them. And I want to set the stage for this topic by reading the verse that precedes it, the verse that we ended with last week in chapter 12, verse 32. He says, everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take from it. And then he continued on into what we have as being chapter 13. There was no break. There was like, okay, go home, we'll do chapter 13 tomorrow. This was a continual message. And so this is connected. And when a truth is established for a group of people, here's something that people do. They will quickly find ways to compromise that truth. Just give them a couple days. Put 3 or 4 people together to talk about it, and they'll say, you know what, I have an idea. You know what, maybe this means this. And it will happen. Read the epistles in the New Testament. It didn't take long for the people in Corinth or the people in Galatia to do this very thing. Brand new churches established in truth by Paul. Here's the truth. Here's what you should do. Here's what I'm teaching you. Now I'm leaving. You continue on doing these right things. And in no time at all, Paul had to intervene and tell them where they went wrong. Many people in the modern church like to debate arguments on the back of the early church fathers. Oh, you believe this? Well, you must be wrong because the early church fathers believed something else. And they are older and they were closer to the source of truth than you are. It doesn't matter how we've been taught to interpret the Bible. It doesn't matter if we attain our doctrines by using solid, systematic methods of biblical interpretation. That doesn't matter. What matters more is how the church fathers interpreted the Bible. Why? Because they were closer in the timeline to when Jesus and the apostles originally handed down this information. So the doctrines established by the church fathers bear more authority than a clear reading of the word because they're older. People will want to debate you on this. They'll tell you you are wrong, and this will be the basis of their argument. And you're this simpleton who just thinks you can go to the word. You think you can just read the Bible. You think you can just interpret it on your own and come up with something different than the church fathers. Well, guess who is older than them? Guess who goes back further than the church fathers? The Corinthians. The Corinthians who bragged about how open and affirming they were concerning the guy who was having an affair with the stepmom. To the people who ate like gluttons and got drunk at the Lord's Supper while the poor went hungry. To the people who turned their worship services into disorderly chaos. They were older than Irenaeus or Augustine or Clement. How about the Galatians who quickly abandoned grace and began to lay obligations of old covenant law upon the people in order for them to secure salvation? They were older than Luther or Calvin. It doesn't matter how close you are to the source of truth. There will be people who are willing and available to immediately compromise, corrupt, and distort the truth. And Moses is wise to this. He's like, hey, we might all be on the same page right now. We're feeling good about the law that I'm laying out right now. He tells them often, though, be careful to do what is written in the law. Do it while guarding it. Do it with care. And he tells them, don't add to it or don't take away from it. Now, the moment you start adding or taking away, the moment you start making your own personal interpretations, the moment you are no longer careful to believe and do what God has prescribed, you set yourself on a path that leads to more and more compromise. One little compromise leads to another and to another. And Moses lays out the first example here in point 1. Let's read the first 3 verses again. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So here's something we learned from verse 3. God will allow you to be tested. God won't tempt you, but God will allow you to be tested. God will let people bring deceptive schemes before you with the intent of deceiving you. God allows that. People try to deceive us. People try to mislead us. And God's like, well, I'm allowing it. Let's see how you do. And here's the warning. When this happens, you need to be able to discern what is true and what is not true. And here's the thing about discernment. People think, oh, I have discernment because I know a lot of stuff. I have discernment because I went to Bible school. Or I have discernment because I am a scholar of Scripture. But there's a difference between discernment and knowledge. One of my favorite people in the world, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, said this: the source of knowledge is study. The source of wisdom is discernment. If you get your knowledge by studying, but you do not get wisdom that way. So knowledge comes from study. And wisdom comes from the application and the practice of that study. And discernment accompanies wisdom. It is not discernment to simply identify right and wrong. If someone says something that's out of line with the Scriptures, and we know the Scriptures, we can point out error and we can bring correction. Oh, what you've said is obviously wrong. Let me show you the passage. Let me show you how you've interpreted this incorrectly. Let me show you these other passages that support it. But situations in life are not always that direct. And here's what Charles Spurgeon says: discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. Now, there's a lot about Moses, his example here, that seems right. In the example that he gives, a person might declare that that they have visions and dreams. They're like, hey, I'm having visions and dreams. And the people would think, well, that's plausible. Because this happened to Joseph. We've heard the stories about Joseph. God gave him dreams and visions, and we're familiar with God working in this manner. And they might declare, well, I'm declaring signs and wonders from my dreams. And they're like, well, Joseph did that too. And those signs and wonders came to pass. So far, so good. All of these things happened in the life of Joseph. This is plausible. This could be a thing of God. Everything seems up and up. This person is earning some credibility. People are drawn in and impressed by their experience and by their words. But then when all is said and done, and everyone's like really impressed, it's like this person is like Joseph in the Bible. God is working through them. Then they draw a different conclusion at the end. Here's the end game of my impressive dream, vision, and sign message. Let us go after the other gods. And that's when the red flags should go up. That's when people were saying, I was really impressed with this person. I was really being drawn in. But now the red flags are going up. And sadly, though, for a lot of people, red flags just don't go up. They don't do it. The dreams, the visions, the signs have drawn them away. They've been manipulated. The argument sounds good and right. They're looking around. Well, other people are buying into it. And, when this happens in modern times, it looks like this. These dreams, visions, and signs begin to trend on social media. People start writing books. There's hashtags, podcasts and blogs. So-called Bible scholars are coming on, defending it. People who have been convinced and they have already followed after the other gods, they begin to share their deconstruction stories. People are talking about how, the reason why we're going this way, it kind of links back to the fact that we were once church hurt. And it all sounds so good. And then we ask, well, why is this happening? Because the process of knowing the Word and then living the Word and then gaining wisdom has not been fulfilled in their lives. They don't have discernment. 1 John chapter 4, verse 1 says, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world. In Hebrews 5:14, but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. And here's something we need to understand. Someone can give a prophecy, and that prophecy can come true, and they can still be a false prophet. Someone can declare a sign or a wonder, and that sign or that wonder can come to pass, and they're still a false prophet. Because we judge them, we test them upon the standard of God's word. This passage tells us how our ability to discern grows in us by the constant practice of distinguishing good from evil. Moses called the people to this kind of vigilance in terms of the commandments. Don't let up, don't grow lax, don't get comfortable and think that you don't need the scriptures anymore. Don't fail to teach your children. Don't cripple the next generation's ability to have discernment. He attaches another factor to this, not just the knowing and the doing of the commandments, but also the desperate need that the believer has to actually love God. What is the easily deceived person demonstrating by their lack of discernment? What are they demonstrating by their deception? Verse 3 tells us God is testing you to know whether you love your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And at that point of deception, when the person has been convinced by the dreamer, they've been convinced by the wonders, and they're offered the conclusion, well, listen, this is why my prophecies and my dreams come true, because I am here to tell you to follow after other gods. It's at that point where it will become evident whether that person truly loves God or not. Everything about this might seem good and right, but the end game is spiritual adultery. Listen, married people, you can build an argument for yourself that makes you feel justified to cheat on your spouse. You can do that. I've seen people do it. I've seen people present them. It doesn't matter what your situation is. It doesn't matter if you've had visions and asked for signs. It doesn't matter if you think that you prayed about it and got some kind of peace. If you go through with it, that's proof that you do not love your spouse. You might feel a sense of responsibility to your spouse, or devotion, or commitment, or concern, but it's not love. Warren Wiersbe says that the word used for love is agape. That's the right way to say it. All right? We're not agape people here. The word used for love is agape, which is love that sacrifices for the good of others. And this is when love is evident. When you sacrifice all that work that you did to be deceived. When you sacrifice all those narratives that you embrace, they really made you feel good. They really made you feel morally superior. They really made you feel like you were on the right team. When you sacrifice all those comforting talking points that the social group thought gave to you, those things feel so right for some people. But even to the Christian that is easily deceived by those social contagions, the real proof of their love for God shows up when the world out there tells you the logical conclusion of their philosophy, and the world demands that we believe certain things in our society. And our world is always demanding for us to believe certain things. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm wired differently. But the moment everybody out there starts saying we have to think a certain way about something, the moment government and media are saying the same thing, forget that. Maybe I'm wired differently than you. But here's the demand that our world makes. You need to hate who we say you hate. You need to vote the way we say you should vote. You need to affirm what we say you should affirm. You need to affirm these things that you think are biblical. They're not biblical. You need to affirm the murder of the unborn. You need to limit freedom of religion. Those people need to be quieted down. They're troublemakers. We just need to shut down other people's rights for our agendas. Or you need to worship other gods. And it's at that point, even if you lack discernment, it's at that point where the final lifeline for you should be at that point is your love for God. These signs and wonders, these signs and bumper stickers of the social voices, they're very convincing. The world is trying to draw us away with other ideas and philosophies. But it's leading you to a conclusion to turn your back on a faith grounded in truth. And that love for God should bring you crawling back to His Word. That's your lifeline. Let's see if you really love God. I'm really being deceived and drawn away, but I'm about to take that final step. And a lot of people take that final step. And that final step we're like, well, I don't really believe that anymore. Well, I don't really, believe what the gospel says, or I really don't believe the Bible, or I think some of the Bible's good, just not anything Paul wrote or anything in the Old Testament. When they start getting to that point where we're saying, I no longer believe in that, before that happens, your lifeline is whether you love God or not. And the process can begin because you love God. And because you love God, you're like, well, I'm going to gain knowledge. And because you love God, you say, well, I'm going to practice that knowledge. And because you love God, you're going to practice. It's going to develop into wisdom. And because you love God and you're beginning to gain wisdom, the Lord is going to allow you and enable you to walk in discernment. And when you have discernment, you won't be deceived by the dreams and the signs and the bumper stickers that the world is throwing at you. So that's point one. Point two, faithfulness over familial bonds. Is it going to go up there or not? That's what it is. You don't have to see it. Oh, there it went. This is from chapter 13, beginning at verse 6. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the people who are around you, whether near you or afar off, from the one end of the earth to the other, and you shall not yield to him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him. Here it is again, that uncomfortable part. But you shall kill him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward in the hand of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and never again do any such wickedness as this amongst you. So as the people are wondering, Moses, how could we ever be deceived into worshiping other gods? How could this happen? We have seen the presence of our God. We've experienced his hand and power. We believe he's going to deliver us into the promised land. And so Moses says, well, here's another scenario. Maybe it won't be an impressive prophet with dreams and signs. Maybe it will be your own child or your parent or your best friend. Maybe it will simply be a matter of family loyalty that draws you away. Maybe the potential heartbreak of seeing a beloved child walk away will lead you to this dreadful decision where you would say, well, if I can't beat him, I'll join him. And you have to understand there's a degree of hyperbole in this. This is to some extent exaggeration to prove a point. Moses is just trying to detour rebellion. Most commonly, people will face these scenarios in different degrees, but all of this is to prove a point. It's a warning for those who might say, if holding on to the truth of my faith means that I lose my idolatrous child, then I'll surrender my faith and support my child. And this is a horrible example. It's a hard one to come to grips with. But remember, Moses is simply presenting a scenario here. And in this potential example, he's trying to express what is most important. It is more important to remain true to God and his word. It's more important. Or you might say, well, or is it more important to surrender faith for the sake of a family member who has become an idolater? And there's a caveat here too. Moses recognizes that our love and loyalty within the bonds of family and friendship is strong. And if anyone could deceive us and lead us astray, it would be those who have the strongest influence in our life. And here's the lesson. What is our greatest importance? Following God in faith and truth, or surrendering that faith in exchange for the false beliefs and influences of family? Jesus talked about this, and he again employs hyperbole, exaggeration, to prove a similar point. In Luke 14, verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Again, this is hyperbole. This is exaggeration. The Hebrew literature would use this to prove a point. Jesus is basically saying your love for me needs to far exceed your love for family and for self. And God, the creator of the human, you would think, he made you. You think that he would have the right to prioritize your love. Oh, who is he to demand that I love him more? The one who made you? Verse 26 is merely the opening line for what Jesus is teaching them. Back in Luke 14. This isn't about hating people that the Bible and other places commands you to love. This is not contradiction. This is a lesson on what it means to become a disciple. You don't hate your family members. That's not the message here. The message is to be a disciple, you have to place Jesus far above others. To be a disciple, he goes on to say, you have to bear your own cross. To be a disciple, you have to know and understand the cost before you even lay the foundation. Going to build a house? Yeah, I'm going to get started. Have you thought about how much everything is going to cost? No, I'm just going to get to work. Then you lay the foundation, you run out of money, people come and mock you. To be a disciple, you have to understand the enormity of the battle before you commit to warfare. Hey, let's go to battle. It's going to be easy. Is it really going to be easy? How many people do you have? 10,000? The enemy has 20. Are you ready to go? Are you going to go with the knowledge that the battle before you is great? Many people come into their faith and they decide, oh, it's a nice thing to believe in Jesus. The people in church are nice. They have produce on the porch. And Calvary Chapel has the best church coffee in Charlottesville. But sometimes, in the midst of all that great, loving hospitality, which is supposed to exist, Sometimes in the midst of all that, they never gain a full understanding of what it means to be a disciple. Jesus wasn't joking in Luke chapter 14. In his commentary on Luke, Charles Talbert says this, Luke 14:26-35 says, one should not count the cost because the demands of discipleship are rigorous, and one should count the cost. Sorry, got to read it correctly. Because the demands of discipleship are rigorous, and it is tragic not to be able to follow through on what one has begun. And this is the heart of what Moses is teaching in chapter 13. If someone was to be drawn away by an impressive demonstration of dreams and wonders, if someone was to be drawn away due to family loyalty, then that person did not understand what discipleship was really about. You know, how many times did large crowds of people walk away from Jesus? You know, if we use Jesus as our model for, you know, being a pastor and starting a church, there would only be 12 of you here. Because the rest of you would be offended at how hard it is to be a disciple, and you'd leave. Not you guys. Maybe somewhere else. The large crowds walked away from Jesus when he said the hard things. Why did the rich young ruler walk away discouraged and disheartened? You know, in his teachings, Jesus would demonstrate the reality of discipleship and the cost of following him, and then many would be like, oh, that's too much. And they were dismayed. Jesus would say some things, and his disciples would be like, this is a hard saying, Lord. They even said this in John chapter 6. Jesus had just said some very shocking things in a synagogue in Capernaum. You ever been with someone, you're in a group, and then one person is talking, and you're like really uncomfortable with what they're saying? It's like, oh, you could have said that better. Oh, no tact. Oh, my goodness, you just offended a bunch of people. That's how they felt. They're like, oh, Lord. He said that he, Jesus, is better than the manna that God sent to Israel in the wilderness. Ooh, Lord, can you tone it down a bit? He said that he is the bread, and that if you eat the bread, you will not die. He told them to eat his flesh and drink his blood. They're like, oh my goodness, Lord. What are you talking about? And all of those who were just intrigued by Jesus, all of those who considered him to be an inspiring prophet, an interesting person, all of those who kind of wanted to be part of the new big thing where the miracles were happening, they couldn't handle these words. They were odd words, offensive words, shocking words. Can you believe what he said? And because they placed greater stock in their emotions, and they gave greater authority to their understanding and their own sympathy than they did to Jesus, they walked away in groves. Jesus drove off hordes of people. The disciples, boy, were they uncomfortable. And they confessed that the message was hard and difficult to listen to. But here's the difference between them and the crowds that walked away. They had counted the cost. And they were committed to Jesus. They had their lifeline. They're like, I don't understand this, but we love you. They put more faith in him than they did in their own offense and lack of understanding. And they were the ones who were rewarded with an answer. No one else stuck around for the answer. No one else stuck around for the explanation. The crowd said, I don't understand your offensive words, so I'm going to be offended and walk away. The disciples said, I don't understand your offensive words, but my faith in you is greater and has more authority than my offense, so I will follow you. And so Jesus says, okay, here's something I want you to understand about what I said. John 6:63. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I've spoken to you are spirit and life. Like, these words are spirit and life. Spirit and life. Let me end point number 2 with a quote from A.W. Tozer. He says, let us get it straight. Jesus Christ does not offer us salvation as though it is a decoration or a bouquet or some addition to our garb. He says plainly, throw off your old rags. stripped to the skin. Let me dress you in the fine, clean robes of my righteousness, all mine. Then, if it means loss of money, lose it. If it means loss of a job, lose it. If it means persecution, take it. If it brings the stiff winds of opposition, bow your head into the wind and take it for my sake. Point number 3, community over compromise. This begins at verse 12, Deuteronomy chapter 13. If you hear in one of your cities, which the Lord your God is giving you to dwell there, that certain worthless fellows have gone out among you and have drawn away the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known. Then you shall inquire and make search and ask diligently, and behold, if it is true and certain that such an abomination has been done among you, you shall surely put the inhabitants of that city to the sword, devoting it to destruction, all who are in it, and its cattle with the edge of the sword. You shall gather all its spoil in the midst of its open square, and burn the city and all its spoils with fire, as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. It shall not heap forever, it shall be built again. None of the devoted things shall stick to your hand, that the Lord may turn from the fierceness of his anger and show you mercy and have compassion on you and multiply you as he swore to your fathers. If you obey the voice of the Lord your God, keeping his commandments that I am commanding you today, and doing what is right in the sight of the Lord your God. So Moses presents this final scenario. The people might ask, how could we who have seen God work so miraculously? We've seen God's faithfulness. We know the stories of his faithfulness. How could we possibly walk away and follow after idols later on after we get into the land? And we've seen that people might be drawn away because of a lack of discernment. They lack discernment because they failed to gain knowledge, and then they failed to practice knowledge, and they failed to gain the wisdom that comes with practicing knowledge, and they failed to attain discernment that comes with wisdom. We've seen that people might be drawn away because they never really counted the cost of discipleship, and their faith was a token, it was a hobby, it was an interest, but it was not over and above all else. And so friends and family, things happened there, and they were drawn away. In this final account, Moses emphasizes again the consequences of his children choosing to serve other gods. The one person who had dreams and predicts signs from our first point, and the one family member who chose to worship idols, those one or two people, what happens is they quickly become 4 people, and then those 4 people are, they're on to something new. They're doing something exciting. It looks like they're having fun, and so 4 people become 10, and 10 people become 20, and in no time at all, they become their own village. And one village, one city will eventually become 2, and so on and so forth. And the prescribed punishment upon them, their community, their livestock, their belongings, is complete. Nothing shall remain. The destruction must be complete. This is God's commandment. This is his message. This is the message. This is how serious this is. Everything that these people have touched is devoted to destruction. So he lets the faithful know that this message is intended to serve as a deterrent for disloyalty to God. Down the road, I want you to think about this. Down the road, when these temptations come to you, you can't imagine them now, but down the road, it'll happen. And when these temptations come to you, I want you to remember this message. This message is here as a deterrent for disloyalty. Remember their law, their government, their theocracy. Their greatest command is exclusive worship to God. And that great command is connected to their national inheritance in the land. It's all connected. If they are not fully devoted to God, that it makes no sense that they would then enjoy and prosper in the land that God gave them. They were connected. That was part of the theocracy that they lived under. God was clear. If you want to be blessed and prosper in the land I give you, then you will worship me exclusively. If apostasy is allowed with one, it will spread. If it spreads, it will grow into a community. If it grows into a community, it will put the entire population of Israel at peril. And if someone gets in trouble, someone gets in trouble, it's like, yeah, they got in trouble. They just basically got their hand slapped. Well, that just means that crime wasn't very serious, right? What they did wasn't too bad. They basically just got off with a warning. They just got a little hand slap. If someone does a serious amount of time, they're going to be in for a while. Well, then the crime was a bit more serious. If someone gets life or they're put on death row, you're like, well, that crime was really serious. It's getting worse. If someone commits treason and is prescribed immediate execution, it's like, whoa, that's really serious. And here's the message for Israel. Apostasy for Israel in the land under God's rule is beyond serious. One person has the potential to put the entire nation at peril. So the stakes for the existence and survival of this nation are high, and so the warnings were meant to define the threats. Our parents told us that if we play with fire, we're going to get... Well, that's mean. Does that mean our parents wanted to burn us with fire? I think some people read the Bible that way. God is telling Israel the exact same thing. God's plan for Israel is that they would live in joy and in peace in the land, that they would multiply, that they would have their needs met, that they would know their God and love their God and experience the love that God has for them. This is what God wanted desperately for his children. So they needed to know with great seriousness the very things that would destroy their experience of living in joy and peace and comfort in the land. And they needed to know how devastating those actions would be. In closing, I think so much of this ties back to the words Jesus spoke in John chapter 6. Have we counted the cost? Is turning back from the plow that we've already placed our hands upon an option? Do we think, well, I'm going to just try this out for a while, but I'm willing to let go of that plow at any moment and turn back? Are we going to quit building after the foundation is laid? The battles we face, well, they might be difficult. So if we're told our challenges in life might be akin to 10,000 soldiers going up to 20,000, will we still go? Well, the odds are against me, but I'm a disciple of the Lord. I serve him. I'm going to do what he calls me to do. Yeah, but it's a pretty big battle. Well, maybe I won't do it. We've all seen people walk away from their faith. Why'd you walk away? Because my loved one got sick. Why would God let my loved one get sick? Or because they got sick. Why would God do this to me? Because their marriage fell apart. Why would God allow this to happen to my marriage? Their child came out of the closet. They got fired. They lost their home. The battle before them was 10,000 going up against 20, and they were told life was going to be easy. They never counted the cost of what it means to be a disciple. I've seen people walk away from their faith because they were duped by the dreams or the visions or the signs and wonders of our society. They've never done the work that leads to discernment. The narratives of society sound good, especially to those who are just very easily susceptible to those social contagion things. They don't need a reasonable argument. A lot of people don't need that. How about a reasonable argument? No. I just need some people screaming catchphrases and waving cardboard, and I'm convinced by that. They don't need the facts. They're fine with misrepresentations and half-truths that are presented in the forms of memes or short-form videos. A lot of people, there's no discernment. Just easily pulled off by an emotional argument. Going to wrap this up now. Let's have the band come forward. We live in a nation where so many people lack discernment. Have you guys noticed that? They lack it in so many ways. And they watch, here's something, get this. People watch the news. Sometimes I have a hard time believing this happens. They watch the news and they watch the right-wing pundits or they watch the left-wing pundits and get this, you're not going to believe what happens. But they watch the guy on the 3-letter network in the suit or the comic at the desk interviewing some out-of-touch millionaire. And they watch that and then... get this. They actually believe what they say. Do you know that people do that? Sometimes I'm just blown away by that. But we exist in the midst of a greater church community that not only lacks discernment, but it also lacks an understanding of what discipleship really is. And here's what I hope for the few of you who call me a pastor, your pastor, that it would not be so with us. We need to be those who gain knowledge, practice knowledge, gain wisdom, and walk in discernment. We need to be those who have a faith that is not swayed by false narratives or hardships in life or family loyalty or cultural pressure. Our loyalty to God supersedes the stuff we don't understand. Our love for God is our lifeline when we're really being pulled away. It supersedes the loss we experience. It supersedes our suffering. It supersedes our desire to be liked and accepted by others. And when the masses are dismayed by their faith and they walk away, and Jesus looks to us and asks, he says, do you want to go away as well? That's what he asked the disciples. You know, everyone else left and they're just kind of nervously sitting there after he said this really hard stuff. He said, do you guys want to go away well? And let me end with this. John 6, 68 through 69. Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God.